Okay, welcome everyone to week 2 of How to Launch and Grow Your Business Beyond $1 million per year with Geoffrey Kent. Geoffrey, thank you for being here. I just keep saying, I'm so excited for this series. I'm Sam Rafis of Coach Connect Hub, and I am thrilled and honored to host Geoffrey in this session today. Geoffrey, take it away.
Thank you, Sam, for providing me with this platform. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of the 6-part series in Entrepreneurial University Onlineable. Just to recap, last week we discussed how to align entrepreneurship with passion so you love what you do by doing what you love. If you weren't able to attend last week's session, we'll put a link to the replay in the chat. But this week, I'd like to guide you through the process of laser focusing on identifying unserved or underserved customers whose problems you can uniquely solve with your products and or services. I'm going to describe the typical entrepreneurial startup experience because it's important for all of us to understand how common our startup journey is. So you're excited on one hand, now that you're finally pursuing your entrepreneurial vision, but at the same time, you're petrified because you don't have money to pay your bills. You wish you had done a better job of planning in advance because you probably haven't saved enough to cover your expenses until you land your first customer. You probably don't qualify for a loan because of your credit rating, which is only going to get worse as you start to pay bills late or not at all. So our solution is to chase every prospective customer as if every customer is a good customer, and this is the quickest way to fail. You've probably had an experience in your past that's taught you this lesson, but you probably didn't realize what you were learning at the time. One of the first lessons I learned in my career took decades for me to realize what I had been taught. Let me explain. At 20, I graduated with my bachelor's degree in business with a major in marketing and a minor in accounting from the University of Oklahoma. I returned home to New York City to start my first corporate job as a sales rep for Xerox Corporation, where I was given a sales territory covering the 5 northernmost counties in New Jersey. GPS technology wasn't sold commercially in 1979, so every night I'd take out my Hagstrom maps and plot out the next day. I'd pick a city, map out where all the business office parks were in the city, then I'd knock on the door of every company in an office park for 8 hours a day to make my 3 machine sales per month quota. Xerox sales policy at the time was to put you on probation when you missed your quota in any given month, then terminate you if you missed quota for 2 consecutive months. I lasted at Xerox for 2 years, but eventually got fired after missing quota for 2 consecutive months, even though all my peers in the same situation were given the option of transferring to the service department. It's hard to absorb much of anything when you're getting fired for the first time in your career, but I learned something incredibly valuable that led to me getting my next job with AT&T. At some point, it occurred to me that people tended to call their copying machines Xerox machines because the process of making copies is called xerography. Once I realized this, I started routinely flashing my Xerox badge and telling receptionists that I was in the building to fix their Xerox machine. This almost always got me past the receptionist, at which point I would walk around until I found the largest office and would then knock on the door to introduce myself. The lesson I learned from Xerox was that when you laser focus on becoming the dominant supplier of solutions for the problems of a niche target market, eventually your name becomes synonymous with the product or service you sell. And when you decide to expand beyond your target market into new markets, your name precedes you. I mentioned earlier that this lesson led to me getting my second job. This happened because a district manager for a competitor who was shadowing one of his sales reps for the day approached me on one of my cold calls after I was able to get past a receptionist they couldn't. Fast forward several decades to the point where I'm about to launch a new tech venture. My 2 co-founders and I pooled $2,000 in startup funds to launch our new venture in the 200 square foot loft of a relative's townhouse. When one of my co-founders quit his tech support job, 6 of his customers followed him to our new venture. Unfortunately, the revenue from these first 6 customers was only sufficient to pay one co-founder a full salary, one co-founder a half of salary, and one co-founder no salary. Guess which co-founder I was? I didn't collect a salary for the first full year of the business. Since 2 co-founders had spouses and small children, and the third was engaged to be married, you can imagine the pressure we were under to generate more revenue immediately. And then the lesson I learned from Xerox about laser focusing on a niche target market you can dominate came flashing back to me. I started thinking about my experiences with contracted technical support throughout my career. You call for help when something breaks, only to have to wait way too long for a tech to show up. When the tech finally does arrive, you can't understand a word they're saying, and they have the personality of a rock. And as soon as they tell you the problem's fixed and leave, your machine breaks again. Since I knew this described the experience most small business customers have with contracted technical support, I figured we could dominate the small business market if we could figure out a way to provide enterprise-level support to small business customers at a price they could afford. So we laser focused on only servicing customers within a 10-mile radius of our office, since this would ensure that we could get to a customer in less than 20 minutes after they placed a service call. I also incorporated technical and psychological testing into our hiring process to ensure that the techs had the skills they put on their resumes and had personalities that would allow them to productively engage with our customers. Now, so far, I've talked about the value of laser focusing on a niche target market you can dominate to succeed in entrepreneurship. But now I'd like to show you with an exercise how you can incorporate this into your business. I'll need one volunteer to assist me with this exercise, so please raise your hand digitally if you'd like to volunteer. All right, Barry, could you unmute, please?
Sure.
All right, so Barry, tell me, what type of business do you either want to start or do you currently have now?
Well, it's kind of on the fence between 2 things, but if we're going to focus on one here, it's going to be gourmet mushrooms.
Okay. All right, I'm going to ask you 3 questions that only require a yes or no answer. And when we finish, you'll know how to identify a niche target market you can dominate. So the first question is the product or service you sell already being sold by anyone, anywhere in the world, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, that's always the correct answer. So I'm just going to stop for a quick second here. Entrepreneurs get trapped by this question. So in entrepreneurial arrogance, particularly when we're trying to raise capital, this question will get asked in a different way. So the question will get asked by an investor of, do you have any competition? So thinking that you have a better chance of getting an investor to invest in your business if you didn't have any competition, some entrepreneurs will say, oh, no one's doing what I do. That's always the wrong answer, because what an investor will then do is they will do a Google search probably after your meeting. They won't do it, well, they may or may not do it in front of your face, but after the meeting, they'll do a quick Google search on whatever your product is. If anything comes up in their search, they're going to make 2 assumptions about you. Either you did a search as well, and you know that there's someone else doing what you do, so you just lied to them, and investors don't invest in liars, or you were too lazy to do the research that they just did, and investors don't invest in lazy entrepreneurs either. So either way, if you said, no, I have no competition, whoever you're talking to, you're not getting any money from them. All right. So you answered correctly. Yes is the correct answer. And to bring this home, when we think of critical inventions of the past several hundred years, I always think of something like the telephone, invented in the 1800s. We credit Alexander Graham Bell with having invented the telephone. He did not. The telephone or the idea of the telephone was actually created more than 200 years before Alexander Graham Bell came up with the idea. Unfortunately, the United States didn't exist as a country, and we didn't have a patent office. So the person that came up with the idea couldn't patent it, right? Going even further deeper into Alexander Graham Bell's story, when Alexander Graham Bell submitted his patent to the patent office, his patent for the telephone was actually the second patent submitted on that day. So there were two patents submitted on the same day for the telephone. What the patent office did, because they had competing patents, they gave both inventors 90 days to respond. The first inventor did not respond, and Alexander Graham Bell did. That's why he got the patent for the phone, and that's why we credit him with having invented the telephone. But as I said, he did not. And so the probability of any of us is going to come up with a product or service as revolutionary as, the telephone is zero, right? So there are 8 billion people in the world. Whatever idea you have, and it could be brilliant, but chances are there's at least one other person in this 8 billion person population of the world that's coming up with that same idea at the same time. So let's move on to our second question. Second question, is every possible customer who could purchase your product or service already being serviced by one or more of your competitors? Yes or no?
No.
Okay. That's your value proposition. Whoever that, you don't need to tell me who that portion of the population is that's not being serviced, but whoever they are, my advice to you would be to laser focus initially on servicing that segment of the consumer population that would buy your services or products that is not being serviced by anyone, so that you become the dominant provider of your products or services to that marketplace. And then you start to expand, because now you're going to have name recognition as being the only person that sells, you said they were mushrooms?
Gourmet mushrooms.
Gourmet mushrooms. So let's say, I used this earlier today in a meeting, I'm going to use it again. You're the only person selling gourmet mushrooms to people with freckles. So now you're going to be known as the gourmet mushroom freckle guy, and that will get around, before you get around. And so when you start to market to a new segment of the marketplace, it's going to be very easy for you to begin to get an audience with someone new, because they're going to have heard your name. So now there's name familiarity. Maybe they've talked to someone who's actually purchased from you. They've tried the mushrooms. They love the mushrooms. They're going to tell that person all this information. So they have all this prior information about you before you actually get to them. The selling process is much easier than if they didn't know you at all, right?
Yep.
So, but I'm going to take it even further, because you could be able to refine this even more. So the final question I'm going to ask you is every customer who's being serviced happy with the service they're receiving? Yes or no?
Well, I'm not in business yet, but I would certainly hope so.
Okay. All right. So now let's say you answered yes to all three of these questions. My product or service exists in the marketplace already. Everyone is being serviced by somebody, and everyone's happy. My advice to you would be shut down your business and figure out something else to do. You can't add value into the marketplace. You're going to fail. You have to add value in order to create a successful business. So you've already said a segment of the marketplace that's not being served. Focus on serving that segment, whatever segment that is. If, on the other hand, or even if there's a segment that's not being served, if you had said, no, I know people that are being served, but they're not happy, then I would tell you focus on selling to that segment, that unhappy segment of consumers. Now, there's three ways you can differentiate yourself when you do this. So one is through speed of service. And this is the Federal Express model. So when Fred Smith created Federal Express in the 1970s, the post office existed. We could get mail. We just couldn't get it consistently, right? So the post office existed, but they didn't always deliver on time, and sometimes they didn't deliver. And so people were unhappy with the post office. So Fred Smith created this company, Federal Express, and said, well, I can deliver mail to you. I can guarantee you, I can get it to you within 24 hours, and I can guarantee you, you will get whatever you ship with me. Would you pay for that? And customers said, yes, they would. And we can see where Federal Express is now. The second way you could differentiate yourself is through price. And so you can do that with high price or low price. So let me give you examples of both. High price would be Rolls-Royce. So when Rolls-Royce came into the marketplace, cars already existed. Everyone had a car. But there was a segment of the population, very wealthy people, who didn't like the fact that if I went to a Ford or GM or Chrysler dealer and purchased a car and drove off the showroom, I would see just in my drive home 10 cars that looked exactly like mine. You know, if I'm wealthy, I might not like that. So those people were saying, I'm looking for a bespoke car purchasing experience. I want to pick everything on this car from the outside to the inside, so that when I drive it off the showroom, I know that there's only one car in the world like the one I have, and I'm the one that has it. And I don't care what it costs. You know, so Rolls-Royce satisfied that marketplace. And there are people who will pay between $250,000 to several $1 million for a Rolls-Royce because they want to be the only one in the world who has that car. Now, on the low side of the pricing spectrum is Walmart. So when Sam Walton created Walmart in the 1970s, in the country, so he's from Bentonville, Arkansas, you know, country town, there were no, you know, department stores, there were no grocery stores, right? And you don't find them in many small towns. So Sam Walton said, let me put a store in a small town environment and purchase products at a price that people can afford. And it became so successful that he moved Walmarts into the suburbs. Became so successful, he moved them into the urban environments, into cities. And so I live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Kmart, JCPenney, Sears, all of these stores don't exist anymore because of Walmart. Walmart's driven them all out of business. Because what Sam Walton realized over time was that once let's say we all live in urban or suburban environments, we probably have relatives who live in the country, and we go to visit them periodically. And when we do, we might actually go into a Walmart. And so when we were doing that, you pick up a particular product or service that you normally buy at home, and you're like, why is this product half the price I pay at home? If this store was ever in my home, in my hometown, I would purchase from the store all the time and nowhere else. And that's what's happened over time, right? And then the last way you can differentiate yourself is through the comprehensiveness of service options you provide to your customers, right? So this is an Amazon.com model. So Amazon.com, created in the 1990s, realized people could buy books by going to Borders or Barnes & Noble, any bookstore, but you couldn't purchase books online. So they said, we're going to exclusively sell books online. It became so popular that they just listened to their customers. And customers said, well, I buy books from you. I'd like to buy this from you or that from you. And so now you can literally purchase virtually anything on Amazon.com. You know, and so I was speaking at a conference in Detroit back in March, and I jokingly said to the audience, I was talking about this, and I said, you can probably buy a house on Amazon.com. And someone from the audience raised their hand, and she said, you actually can. She said, 3D printed houses are sold on Amazon.com now. I didn't realize that. I was saying this jokingly, you know. So anyway. those are the three ways you could differentiate if, everyone's being served, but there are people that are not happy. Barry, thank you very much for volunteering.
Thank you.
So before we get to your questions this week, I want to thank everyone for attending the second of 6 sessions of Entrepreneur University Onlineable. In 2 weeks from today, I'm going to discuss and guide you through the process of forming unconventional strategic alliances to gain advantage over your competitors. With the time we have left, I'd like to answer whatever questions you have about what we've covered tonight.